All right, folks. Again, for those of you who just arrived, welcome to DVTEL's technical webinar on the new Ariel Gen II next generation series of cameras. You can see them being displayed, down at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Now, I do want to point out, again, for those of you who just arrived, down in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, in the software that's now overlaid on your screen, you'll see a handout section where we do have two handouts in there. We're going to be referring to these towards the end of the webinar, so you can just sit tight if you don't have them downloaded for now. But maybe as we're talking about things and we're going forward, towards the end of the webinar, we'll be referring to these things. So if you want to have a copy of those handy, go ahead and download those at your leisure. Again, my name, I guess not again, but let me introduce myself. My name is Marty Major. I am with DVTEL's TCX training department. I love doing these webinars. I do classroom training, which I love as well, but I like when we get to introduce some new products, mainly because of the features that I know integrators and our VAR partners love. I come from an integrator background myself, so I can sort of relate to and enjoy some of these new features that we get to introduce. Now, we do have a couple of panelists on the line with us. I think it's important for the attendees at the webinar to understand it's not just Marty talking. We have some experts behind this. They're going to be answering some questions. Also on the software on the right-hand side, you can see the question section, so feel free as I'm rambling on and covering the material in the slides. Anything that's not clear, please ask questions. We've got a team behind us, so I'll let them introduce themselves. We'll start off with Haim Shane, who's on the line with us as one of our presenters. Haim, go ahead and introduce yourself and let everybody know what you do.
Hi everyone, this is Haim Shane, Director and PC of Edge Products. Very excited to be introducing Ariel Gen II. It's the latest and greatest in terms of observational class cameras, and Marty will definitely show you some insight into that. So Marty, take it away.
Excellent, Haim. Thank you very much. And in addition to Haim, we also have our CTO, Ed Thompson, on the line with us. Go ahead, Ed, and introduce yourself as well.
Well, hello everybody. My name is Ed Thompson. I'm the CTO. I'm really happy to be here today to talk about the Ariel Gen II cameras. We believe that these are really substantial breakthroughs to the HD 1080 product technologies out there. We think that these will go up against the best of the best that you'll run into in the field. From a competitive standpoint, the performance is second to none. So let's get started. Thank you, Marty, and let's get going.
All right, Ed, thank you very much. So you see we have the experts with us, so any question that you can ask, please do so. This is the time for it. That's what these webinars are all about. So let's move forward and take a look at our first slide. If you've been on any of our webinars in the past, you've probably seen this one. We like to showcase this to really point out the strength of being an end-to-end solution provider. And as you can see here on the screen, from video management systems all the way down to encoders and mobile and web solutions, we've got the entire package. And it's really important, I think, to our VARs and our customers both, that we do provide the end-to-end solution where they can come to one provider and get everything that they need. But it's equally as important to point out that even though we do have the end-to-end solution, cameras, analytics, the servers themselves, encoders, all of the stuff here, we are very focused on the ONVIF platform, right? We chose to standardize on the ONVIF platform, standardize, right, between our own products, so that ensures anybody that wants to use, say, our cameras on their other systems, as long as that other system is fully ONVIF compliant, our cameras work seamlessly. This is what customers want. This is what the demand has shifted towards. We've been doing this for a while now, and we've really embraced the ONVIF standard, so I wanted to point that out. So going forward, we are going to be talking about the high-definition cameras, and in particular, the Ariel Gen II model that we've just discussed and saw actually a screenshot on that first screen. That was an actual screenshot of an aerial camera of the George Washington Bridge. And as we go going forward, we want to talk about that model. But first, I do want to talk about what I like to call the resolution evolution here at DVTEL. And just obviously, we've had cameras since before 2013. But you can see on the left here, if we just sort of walk through these colors, In 2013, we had basically the same camera, but 2 different resolutions with various models for different things like lens options and IR, etc. But basically, the Quasar 1 was a 720 and a 1080p. If we move into 2014, you'll see that we introduced the Ariel 1 model, 720p, and we still had the Quasar 1 720 and 1080p as well. But we also sort of bracketed, not only added the 720p Ariel, a new line of 720p camera in addition to the Quasar 720, but we also added at the other end of the spectrum the Quasar 1440p, increasing resolution as well. And as we stepped into 2015, you can see here that the Ariel 1 still at the top. The only real difference here is if you go down towards the bottom, the last 2 on there were additions in 2015. The Quasar 2 model, different chipset, different, a whole new sort of environment. And anybody that has used these cameras has seen the improvement in a lot of the things that we'll talk about in the following slides. But if you go farther forward into the last year, or next year basically, 2016, you can see the Ariel 2 model is the sort of lowest end. Just like all of the things that I talk about in our training classes, that we sort of keep up with the industry itself, whether that is support for XP or servers and different things. As Microsoft, the platform that we use, moves up, we keep up with it as well. In addition to the physical things, also the industry, right? We keep up with the industry. You can see way back in 2013 there, 1080p was just being introduced, right? I mean, that's almost 4 years ago. 2012 actually is when the Quasar 1080p first came out. So now 4 years later, we're introducing the Ariel 2 as the lowest resolution model that's going to be in our line. We're going to actually retire the Ariel 1 on January 1st. And that, again, is keeping up with the industry itself. So if you look on the right-hand side in 2016, that's really the only change from 2015 at the moment. In 2016, this may even change. We may add other things depending on what the market desires, right? That's what we're trying to do. So let's look forward then and talk about what's new then in the Ariel Gen 2. There's a lot of cool things that were already in our other models that are not on this list. These are just the new things, right? And then we're going to discuss some of these things on the following slides to sort of flush out what exactly they mean. As you can see, the top one there on the left is the full HD resolution 1080p. We just discussed that, right? That is, we do have 2 different ones. Let's go back one slide for a second here. If you could see, I didn't mention it, but if you look at the top of 2016, the Ariel 2 is the full HD or 1080p, along with the Quasar 1 model, which we still are producing, right? There's customers that have them in specs and different tenders, things of that nature, things that take some time, and we don't want to cause the hassle of having to change stuff by dropping the line just because we do have now our Ariel 2 model 1080p cameras as well. But really, what is the difference between, we have 2 different 1080p models, and today is where we're going to see some of the new technology that's been introduced that we're utilizing to actually have a drastic improvement on a number of things. And that's what I should have talked about, so I could have just segued correctly right into the second one here for the enhanced low light sensitivity. And if you look at that one plus the next 3, they're all sort of related to one thing, and that is the chip itself, or the image sensor that we are now using for this model, the Ariel Gen II. It has an enhanced low light sensitivity, and because of that, really, the other 3 sort of fall into place. We have a higher signal to noise ratio because of that lower light sensitivity. We have a wider color reproduction range. We don't shift into night mode near as fast as some of our competitors' models, simply because of the enhanced low light sensitivity. We can actually render color when some others can't. And then the advanced digital wide dynamic range also. And we'll talk about digital wide dynamic range versus shutter wide dynamic range as we go forward. But I do want to point out, as you can see in bright yellow there, is an advanced digital wide dynamic range. Back in the day, there used to be a bigger sort of chasm almost between digital wide dynamic range and actual shutter based. But we'll talk about that as we go forward. So again, I focused on it big on the end-to-end solution slide. We are completely ONVIF profile as compliant. So if you have a system that is as well, every one of our components will work with it, no problem. It's the whole reason for ONVIF compliance to begin with. A lot of other companies maybe say that they are ONVIF compliant as well, and they may do so just to the minimum standards. We do it full tilt, right? We're actually standardized everything in the DVTEL platform on the OnViv profile. So customers who do need to interchange our stuff have no worries that our stuff is going to stop that from happening. And as we go forward, the last two on this what's new list, the low profile modular mounting accessories. We'll see that about 2/3 of the way into the webinar. And even one of the handouts that we've got over there has some pictures in there as well that we'll point you to as well. And then finally, we've added the 128 gig SD card capabilities, which is a great thing. I like the edge storage. Sometimes it's used as a misnomer. I like it because it can provide redundancy, right? Your server goes down, the camera records to itself, the server comes back up, it dumps that stuff back in, and you haven't lost anything. Really looking forward to the SD card capabilities. So with that said, we already talked about we have a different image sensor with this one, and it makes a huge difference between our two 1080p cameras. Now again, we're still proud to show off our first version products and our second version products as well, because when we came out with the Quasar Gen 1 4 years ago, we were leading edge at the time. This is 4 years later in the surveillance industry. As we all know, things march forward very quickly. And so we're keeping up with the industry. We want to be leading the industry, not keeping up as in a catching up mode, but we want to be on the front end, leading the industry, and that's what we've been doing for years. So again, this is one of the reasons why we are introducing the Ariel Gen II as the lowest end model, because our customers have already told us that's the lowest we want. We don't need anything lower going forward. So that's our plan. So basically, with the big yellow question mark, what changed? How is the image sensor so much better now in the Ariel Gen II versus the same resolution model of the Quasar Gen 1? This is really the secret right here. I love this slide. I like it because it's visual, right? You can easily see. And if you look on the left-hand side right here, this is the old style chip. This is the old style image sensor that used front illuminated structure. And if you can see just visually the light coming down in those orange lines, it goes through the on-chip lens, through the color filters to choose whatever color it's going to choose. And then it has to go through this metal wiring to actually get to the substrate, to the photodiodes down there where it can actually absorb that light. And if you look on the right side now, the new version, the backside illumination, it's a significant structural design change that allows significantly more light to reach the photodiode substrate to be able to be absorbed. Now, when I first saw this slide, I looked on the left and I said, well, who would ever do this, right? Why would you put the metal wiring up there to make it pass through? Why didn't they just start the way that it's going now with the backside illumination? And the person I asked said, well, why don't they have carburetor technology in engines anymore? Because it's not as efficient. We have a much better fuel injection style now that everybody has gone to, computer assisted. It's just more efficient, and that's what it's all about. And that's what this significant design change really helps us improve. As you can see the visual, the light goes directly to that substrate. But in addition to that, I want to point out the angle of the light. Have you ever, anybody ever seen an image where it's brighter on the inside or the middle than it is sort of on the outside edges? It's really caused by angle of light and the way it used to penetrate. Because in the old style, in the front illuminated structure on the left, any light that's coming in at a severe angle, it has much more of that metal wiring to sort of get through at that angle than it does when it's straight to begin with, that screen door sort of effect that's right there. So you would lose some of that light, and that's why pictures I'm sure most people have seen in the center they're brighter, on the edges they're darker. That is mainly why. So by having that substrate and photodiode up closer to where the light's coming in, even at a severe angle, it's still reaching that substrate that it needs to. It doesn't have to pass through the metal wiring. So a significant design increase that really makes it much more efficient in actually absorbing light than it was before. So any questions? I guess this is a good time to stop sort of before we move forward and see if we do have any questions. Haim or Ed, has anybody thrown us some good questions yet, or have we covered most of what we've talked about so far significantly enough where they don't ask questions yet? Ed, Haim? I'm looking here myself. Looks like we don't even have any questions. All right, good. You guys stay awake. Come on, you guys got to fire some questions to these folks. We want to make sure that they get to participate. They're the ones that with all the sort of expertise in the camera. So maybe we're talking about the technology now. As we move forward into the camera stuff itself, we'll have some more participation with the crowd. Now, I want to show, of course, after talking about that new backside illumination versus the front side illumination, I want to be able to show that, right? So if you look right here on this screen, we have two different lux levels. So you can see the top one is just to show a couple of things. The bottom one is actually to show the enhanced low light performance, which the title on top indicates. But the top part, if you look, every one of these is set at 130 shutter speed, average speed out of the box. And if you look at the top one, that's actually at 840 lux. You have your Ariel 2 on the left and your Quasar 1 on the right. They both have the same resolution. The lux level is the same, the shutter speed is the same, but you can definitely see an increased ability to make out the differences in color. It's much sharper. If you look in the top left up here in the grayscale, you can see this is much, much clearer than the grayscale over here on the Quasar 1. And that's because of that low light enhanced ability. It's able to render all of those things. You can see a number of different improvements here compared to the right-hand side as well. Look at the license plate. That's sort of, close to being the same, but there's a couple of other things. The clock, right? I can see the clock a lot clearer. It's just able to be finer detailed. You can see things better, even at the same exact resolution as the Quasar 1. Now, if you look down at the bottom, we have a little bit, this is at 2.5 lux, so it's hardly any light, right, coming in compared to the top one. And you can see a significant difference here. This is where we really see the enhanced low light performance of that image sensor that we're using for the Ariel 2 versus the one we still have for the Quasar 1. Still a good camera, but just at really low light, the Ariel 2 outperforms the Quasar 1 in big steps. You can see this, right? All right, now as we go forward, I do want to show one other thing that we talked about is wide dynamic range, right? The enhanced wide dynamic range that we talked about on that first slide. Now this is just a simple representation here on this pictogram. On the left-hand side, you have a gentleman standing in front of a large plate glass windows in a tall tower somewhere, and there is no WDR on. On the right-hand side, it's the same picture of him with WDR turned on. When we actually get to the camera's interface at the end of this webinar, I'm going to turn on and turn off WDR so you can see the difference. But basically, WDR is the technology basically that allows the camera to be able to render both a short exposure and a long exposure. Now, what do I mean by that? A short exposure basically means the shutter is only opening very briefly, and it does this to block too much light from coming in. So the left-hand side no WDR picture is showing you one version of no WDR. The camera could also choose to have a fast exposure to see the gentleman in the front, but if they did that, then that would open up the shutter far too long for the amount of light that's coming in the windows, and you might be able to see the guy standing there, but you'd be able to see nothing at all behind him. It would be a big white blob. So without WDR, the camera sort of has to choose one or the other. With WDR on the right-hand side, you can see and again, we talked about there's two different versions, but WDR basically that's what it's doing. There is electronic or digital WDR that uses the image sensor and in conjunction with the digital signal processor to actually render better light into areas where it's darker, and it maybe will try to back off some of the light in areas that are too bright and sort of give you a sort of middle ground. And the other version then would be the multi-shutter WDR, where the image sensor actually takes two different exposures, the long exposure and the short exposure, and applies them together into another frame, and that's what you see here. So you get the best of both worlds, right? You get the short exposure that allows you to see the outside, and the long exposure which allows you to see the gentleman in the front that was standing in shadow before. Now, there used to be a wide difference between electronic or digital WDR and true multi-shutter WDR. Back in the day, 4 years ago, when the technology was first emerging, there was a huge difference between the two. But as we move forward, again, as image sensors get stronger and faster, and DSPs do the same, the digital WDR is becoming much, much closer now to the true multi-shutter WDR. So, with that little mini WDR tutorial, let's move forward then and take a look at the advanced DWDR performance. Again, this is digital now, but again, I'll focus on the fact that it is so much closer now to the true multi-exposure WDR that as we move forward, you should see a lot less significance between the two of them. Maybe that first little letter will fall off then because it won't be as significant when you're trying to describe what it can do. So again, the same setup we had before. On the top, we have the Ariel 2 on the left, and we have the Quasar 1 on the right. This is at 85 lux. Previously, for when we're in our lab here, sometimes it's difficult to actually reproduce what we're trying to show So on the previous couple slides, we had it at much higher, right, 840 lux or so. But here, we're showing the WDR performance. What's more important is shadowing and lighting, right? So 85 lux at the top, and again, we're all at the 130 shutter speed. You can see on the left-hand side, on the top, the 85 lux, the handling of that bright light that's turned on right below the license plate right here is clear, right? I mean, it can clearly handle it better. It's not being washed out by all of this extra stuff by having the exposure open long enough to be able to see everything else that's in the screen. So it combines the two basically, and you can see also the light that's on, but it doesn't do anything to the outside right here. Also, even reflections, things like that on the clock, it looks a little bit clearer and more defined than it does on the right, as we saw on the previous screen. But again, that's at the high lights. Now, if we drop down the lux, where the light really starts kicking on, because it was already dim, as we saw on the previous screen when we were at 2.5 lux with the Quasar 1 model, now with WDR performance, you can see the huge difference. This is actually good WDR performance, right? Without WDR on in the Quasar 1, you'd see nothing, right? It would all be it would come out to here almost. So you could see the performance values have drastically increased with that new image sensor that we're using for this model. Really crisp and clear picture, even with the light on. We don't suffer any of that problems. Even look at the 85 lux. Even here this is still a better picture, and it's such a much lower lux level than this one is to begin with. So I think you can see the benefits of that new chipset and the new image sensor that we've employed with the Ariel Gen II. All right, let's check here on the right-hand side, see if we have any further questions. I don't see any, which is good, I guess. It means we're explaining stuff. When we get to the camera's interface, I bet there'll be a few questions. And this one as well should produce some. Our additional features here. One thing I did want to point out, I think I did in the beginning, this is an actual screenshot yanked right out from a feed from an Ariel 2 camera. We could have used something else, right? But it looks so great we didn't need to. And on the left-hand side over here, this is the corridor mode, which this camera does support now. So that's important to understand what corridor mode is. We'll talk about it briefly, I think, as we go into the camera's interface. So the additional features that we do want to talk about these cameras, first of all, are things that are actually not universal to just itself. Excuse me, that sounded dumb. They're actually universal to all of our cameras, and that is the multi-stream simultaneous encoding capabilities. And what do I mean by that? If you look on the left-hand side right here, the camera actually has the ability to stream three different types of streams, and you get to use them however you like to use them. And we'll talk on the next slide how we can even enhance that further. So right here you have the multi-stream simultaneously encoding on the left. You have larger screens, even a full screen maybe. The camera is a 1080p camera, so you might as well use its full resolution when you can actually see it. But if your panels or your tiles start getting smaller, there's really no reason to stream 1080p to that panel because you can't see it anyway, right? The panel is too small for the human eye to be able to tell, any fine detail that you would get in a 1080p in that small size. And then you can see as you go forward on the right, even smaller, down to the D1 image. Why send a 1080p stream there? You could record a 1080p all day, but why send a live 1080p stream to that right-hand panel when there's absolutely no benefit to that? And there is a whole lot of downside to that, right? In as far as the system itself being able to handle and encode all of that you're sending to the client machine, it doesn't have to do that if you send it at the lower resolutions. And again, that couples well with human eyes, because human eyes, there's no value in sending the higher resolution to the smaller pane. Now, what if you digitally zoom into your D1 screen? Well, there you go. Because of this, because of the other streams that we have available, and the next slide that I'm going to talk about, you are able to go back and grab those extra pixels, right? So even if you're in the smallest pane, you're zooming in, you still have the ability to reach out and grab the full number of pixels that are available, 1920 wide, as we can see here for 1080p. All right, now the next slide again sort of adds a little icing to the cake. Adaptive streaming And if you look across the bottom, it tells you pretty much exactly what it does. It automatically provides the best suitable stream based on the tiles that you're showing on whatever screen you're looking at. On the left-hand one there, it's a 1080p camera. That's its best resolution. It's going to give you that if you get a full screen image. But let's look at the middle one. Maybe I've got my 1080p in this layout in the largest screen there, but those smaller panes, the 720 is fine for that, right? It's lower resolution in that size than 720p, 1920 pixels wide. So I can just send the 720p stream to that image. And then further, on the far right image, you can see the 1080ps are there as well. They're smaller than the other ones, but they're still larger than the 720s in the middle. So I'm going to send the 1080p. It's the best one, right? It's the most suitable for the size of that pane that I've got. And it does it automatically, and that's the best thing. That's the magic, right? That's the secret sauce. Anybody can actually open up a layout like this and go to each one of the cameras back in Admin Center and program, all the resolutions to fit whatever layout you got. But that seems awfully labor intensive, and nobody's going to do it, right? It just takes too long. Or if you do it, it's going to take you half a day to set them all up. And then, if somebody changes anything, then you're done. You've messed everything up. So our system does it automatically. Whatever panes you're showing, whatever layout screens you have up on there, the system understands the size of the individual panes and sends out the most suitable stream. It's a great thing when it comes to both saving bandwidth, tons of bandwidth you can save depending on the number of live viewing people that you've got, and also the system resources on the actual client machines. They don't have to render all of the panes of their video at the highest resolution it's being recorded at. It's just going to make it show and have to render the most suitable for the size of the panes you're using. So it's really going to help out. I love adaptive streaming. Again, it's not specific, that was the word I needed before, to the Ariel 2. It is across all of our Edge products. So it's a great feature. Anybody that has used it can attest. It saves you money, saves the customer money. All right, then, as we go forward, we do want to talk about our mounting accessories, and this is, I like the design, right? It's the modular low-profile design that we mentioned early on. You can see how beautiful these cameras are on the right-hand side. I have one now, right? I don't know if they're going to get me to send it back. I like it so much. And if you can see here, the low-profile modular design, which is what I just mentioned, on the left, on the bottom row there, on the left-hand two, the mini dome cameras right there, you've got your varifocal, mechanical varifocal dome on the bottom left, and then next to it on the right you have your fixed. And then the same thing on the right-hand side as well. You've got your fixed and then your varifocal, the bigger one, obviously, for the mechanical focus and lens. And then you have the apparatus above them, basically, or the accessories that go with the cameras. One note, what I like about this sort of low-profile modular design is the fact that the camera itself doesn't have to have a back box. It doesn't have to have a junction box if you have your bullet camera there. But if you need one, you can get one to go along with it, including all of the other things that go with those, right? We have our pendant mount on the top left up there, your back box. These are interchangeable also with either of the varifocal or fixed lens cameras. Same thing is true with the junction box and the pole mount bracket there. Those all sort of go in conjunction with each other, and you can swap out the actual cameras themselves with all of the accessories that go with it. So if you have a varifocal bullet or a fixed lens bullet, both of them hook up exactly the same to either the pole mounts. Oops, I touched the screen. I got a new computer, and I realized the other day by accident that it was a touch screen. And as I was pointing out the little bracket box here with my finger, it moved forward. But they're all interchangeable. We'll see this also in the handouts that we talked about earlier on, where we can actually get down to the nuts and bolts of what all these look like. Here is just another example of, on the left-hand side, of course, you've got the mechanical, right, the varifocals, the larger dome. On the right-hand side, you've got your fixed dome. It's just a little bit smaller, but notice that the accessories themselves are all identical. It doesn't really matter which model you use. They're going to fit and work just the same in all of our accessories for them. So with that said, let's go ahead and open it up now. This is really the end of the slide presentation. I want to go into the two handouts that we talked about already, and I'll bring Ed on as well to add some color. Ed created them, right? So who to talk about them best except Ed? I'll touch on the high points, but if I leave stuff out, it'll definitely be good to have him there and pointing out the real strength of the document itself. And the lens selector, you can see, is another one of the handouts that we've got as well. But I'm looking over here in the questions. Ed or Chaim, have we had any questions up to this point? Looks like we have a quiet bunch. I don't see any. All right, well, here we go. All right, looks good. All right, well, no questions. We should just move forward and let the people get back to what they need to do. So I've already got things. Whoop, go ahead, Ed.
Marty, were you going to actually open the either of those two handouts just to familiarize them with that, or?
Absolutely. Yep. Matter of fact, that's where I was going next, Ed.
Okay, great.
So we can see right here, as Ed just mentioned. I got to don't update. Now you can see here, this is the camera accessories selector guide, or the CASG, if nobody actually calls. But you can see that this is a document that's been out there for a while. Ed just updated it with our new Ariel Gen II accessories that are right in here. So any of our VARs that are ordering our products are very familiar with this document. This is the new update. Again, it is a handout, so please download it. But you can see a couple of different things in here. If we look at the Ariel Dome, you can do a number of different things. We don't really want to sort of go into this document and describe sort of what it does, but I want you to play with it, right? Download it, and you can see. And Ed, is there anything?
Yeah, I mean, I can make a comment on this page. Well, going back to that page, so you click on any of these items that you'd like to look at. It gives you a general overview as to what's in the box and what it would look like, what it's mounted with the camera. And if this is something that you're interested in ordering, what you can do is add a quantity and the quantity number in the quantity box there, and then say add the bill of materials. If you click on that, it adds it and clears the quantity box. Now if you go up and click view my bill of materials, you'll see it copied the quantity 10, the product code, and the general description of the product here, and you can keep building your bill of materials and then save it and keep working on this. So this is basically like a small project file, and then once you're done with this, you can print this out or email this to somebody we can actually obviously price all the items out and so forth. And then it has a notes section here, so you can say these 10 items were for building 3, or whatever comments you'd like to make. So that's what this product is, what this bill of material is about. And like I said, you can click around, hit the back button or the home button, and see different, click on something. Yeah. So you can this is the back box, and then there's also a 4S box mounting plate for this. So this is the way you can easily click through, and if you're not familiar with the accessories that go with these products, you can click through some of these pages and quickly become an expert on what the camera will look like when it's installed with these accessories and so forth. So that's the purpose of the accessory guide, is to actually take you through and give you a quick way to familiarize yourself with the entire ecosystem for all of these cameras. And of course, as you keep scrolling down, there's all the legacy products down, and you can keep going, and they all work about the same thing. There's also links here if you're interested in just looking at, for instance, DVTEL mini domes. You could click on one of these on the right, and it'll take you out to the website and actually show you, the full selection of cameras that are, for instance, in mini dome class or something like that. So these are direct links to the website where you can get more information, view the entire product information, literature, and download it. So this is really like a jumping off point into the entire ecosystem for all DVTEL cameras. Excellent. All right. If there's any questions on this document, we should just pause for a second and see if there's any questions. I don't know if this is new to folks. This document has existed in one form or another for quite a number of years, and hopefully it's out there. You should discard any previous versions of it. This version 2.2 contains all of the latest information, and this should be the accessories guide that you should use going forward. All right, excellent. All right, well, let's go ahead and we'll close that one down. Oops,
Don't save. And let's go ahead and take a look at our lens selector also. It's the other handout that we've got in the software in the bottom right-hand corner. Now this one,
home button.
Home.
Just quickly, we'll start. Okay, so this is the jumping off page for the lens selector guide, and basically it has all the various products that are currently shipping, and it gives the optical information for each of the products, whether it's a varifocal or it's a fixed camera. For instance, this is the Ariel Gen II mini dome bullet lens. So they both offer a 3 to 10 millimeter lens. And if you look here, the only thing you really have to enter to use this form is enter the object distance. So if it's 30 feet, which is what it comes with, and you enter that, and it'll calculate in the aqua color, the light blue color area over here gives you all the data. So it gives you things for each of the focal lengths that the camera supports. So you can see that down the list there, if you look at the lens focal length, the fixed version has a 2.8 millimeter, so it has a at whatever object distance, it gives you the horizontal viewing angle, the field of view in terms of feet. If you're in a country that uses meters, you can go up right above that. There's a drop down that says NTSC mode. You could drop that down, put in PAL mode, and it changes the units of measures over to meters. Now, the actual data doesn't change that much, because whether you're using feet divided by feet or meters divided by meters, the numbers are going to be about the same, but it will give you information in terms of meters instead of feet. And from this, you can see, if you're interested, for instance, in the bottom, visual identification or license plate recognition or facial recognition, it gives you those kind of recommendations. And the last column on the right actually gives you, for the various focal lengths at this particular distance. So if you're at 100 feet away and you wanted to do visual identification, you could do that starting at around 8 millimeters. You could read, go down the thing so it says 31, and then you come over and say, okay, around 8 millimeters, this could do visual identification at 100 feet distance from the subject. If you go back, we can look at the same kind of, go to the home. No, just do the home. Okay. So you have that kind of information for all of these various camera models, and it gives you the information you need so that you'll know that deploying this camera. Well, let's look at, for instance, let's just go to the Gen 2. Click on that for a moment, and I beg your pardon. Go back to home. I was looking for the Quasar Gen 2. Those, yeah. So let's do that one. Yeah, on. And you'll notice that that camera, for instance, comes with 2 lens options. One's a 3 to 9 and the other's a 7 to 22. So you see all the focal lengths of both of those lenses shown here, so you can pick exactly what you need for the project. For instance, if the previous Ariel at 100 feet wasn't giving you enough pixels per foot, you could come up here to a Quad HD or to the 4K and give much longer, get more pixels per foot based on that kind of a distance. So this really allows you to determine which camera to select based on the kind of information that you or your client needs to get from this camera. And again, there's nothing here to do other than put in the distance and the resolution, because the resolution tells you how many pixels per foot you'll get. If you drop that down, you'll see there's other resolutions. For the most part, people are using the highest resolution for recording, so the other resolutions are there for reference, but for the most part, everybody's going to tend to record the highest resolution available, and that's what the drop-down defaults to. So that's the lens selector guide. These two documents go hand in hand and really allow you to pick and choose both the right camera and the right accessories to go with these cameras, whether it's one of the Quad HD 4K, the Ariel Gen II, or even some of the legacy products like the PTZs, and which are still current, and even the Gen 1 cameras that will remain in the line for a period of time. So that's what this is about. If there's any questions, now's a great time to bring them up. If not, I think that pretty much covers just a quick introduction to these two important documents.
Marty, I think you can go up to the web.
Sorry, I was talking to myself there for about 2 minutes, and I didn't even notice. Thanks, Haim. I had my mute button when Ed was on. What I was saying that nobody heard, thanks, Ed. I appreciate that. It helps out a lot. If anybody has any questions about any of this stuff, just send me an email, and I'll get it to the right people who can actually answer things. Because there may be a question that occurs after the webinar is over, and then you're like, oh, I wish I had asked that. So send me an email. It's M as in Marty, Major, my last name, just like the rank in the Army, mmajor@dvtel.com, and we'll get it where it needs to go. So with that said, let's go ahead and close this down. And what I do want to do now is actually go to the camera's interface itself. Oops, I was going to log in to see it, but you know, most cameras log in the same way. As you can see here, let me full screen this. This is the actual camera's interface itself. The live interface could not be any easier to understand. It only has 4 buttons over here, well, and this one, but 4 buttons up here, and if you hover your mouse over, snapshot, doesn't need an explanation, takes a picture. This one full screens it, which I like. It's a great image. Come on, car, come by there so you can see the car going by in full screen. One thing I do wanted to point out, usually there's a lot of cars, so I figured I could just talk about it. As these cars go by, you can actually see the spokes turning in there, which means, one, that our frame rate is high enough to do so. But when you freeze frame, or take snapshots, for instance, you're not going to get the blurred spoke kind of look, right? We have enough being able to render the image itself. So it's a really great image itself. This actually has like medium WDR on, and we're pointing sort of almost right at the sun, so I knew I'd have to do something to combat that for the webinar. We also have a recording button. This is very simple. As soon as you click it, it asks you where you want to put it. You tell it, and it does. And then you click the button again, and it stops, and it records an AVI to that local or wherever, you know, network attached that you want from this camera if you're just playing around, right? Obviously, our VMS is...
It's a great feature if you're out on a site and you want to send a video clip to somebody and you don't want to export it out of Latitude or something. This record button records right to the hard drive of the machine that's running this web interface. It creates an AVI file which is highly portable. It can be, you can Dropbox it to anybody, and they can take a look at it and be either, it could be a client that wants to be sure that a camera is aimed exactly the way they want it, or it could be for a technical support issue. But this really is a very quick and easy way of making a very quick, just capture a few seconds or a few minutes of video and send it off in a very portable fashion. The image quality is exactly the same. It's recording the stream you're looking at here. It's exactly the same quality as what's recorded to the Latitude system or the NVMS that's attached to the camera.
Good point. Also, another thing to point out here as well, I'm looking at this like on my machine here, and those cars are going by maybe 50 feet from where I'm sitting. It looks awesome to me, but because we are on a GoToWebinar session, sometimes there's a bit of latency. So if you're seeing any of that, that ain't the camera, that's the GoToWebinar session. Just wanted to point that out. All right, so let's just go into the settings then so we can, whoops, what did I do? I don't know what I did. Oh, my Internet Explorer. Imagine that. Internet Explorer stopped working. Hold on a second. We'll let it die. It should come right back up. It's the only good thing about Internet Explorer is they built that into it. So once it dies, it'll always reinvent itself. All right, so we're in our settings window right now. Uh-oh. This was working fine before. Now Internet Explorer is hosing up. You know what? Let's close down Internet Explorer. I was playing on this all morning long with no issues, of course. When the webinar
could be a conflict between some of the webinar settings, and
that's the only thing that makes sense. Yep.
Yeah.
Because it's the only thing I didn't have open earlier today. All right, and this is what you should have seen initially of me logging into the camera. All right, this should do its job. Come on, camera. It's coming. There we go. All right. This is where we left off before technical difficulties kicked us out of IE. But anyway, you'll notice the sections are broken into 3, nice and easy to understand. I actually I have a 12-year-old kid, and he isn't that technical. He likes to play games and whatnot, but I sat him down and I said, let's walk right through these. And he's like, oh, do I have to? I said, just come on. I want to show you how easy it is. So we did. And he said, are you done? And I said, was it easy? He said, yes. I said, all right, beat it. It's very, very simple. And even for folks that don't really have a lot of camera experience, I've been into camera interfaces where it'll just melt your brain, right, with all the stuff that's in there, and it's very difficult to understand. Our layout is very easy, very intuitive to understand. Here's me zooming it in. I just wanted to show how it does it automatically when you do that. Notice it's refocusing itself automatically. As I make that adjustment, it should clear itself. There it is. And it does that because I have my zoom trigger control on, right? If I turn that off and I do zoom in, I would have to either come down and manually adjust or just hit it with the one push autofocus. I'm a big fan of the one push autofocus. Such a big fan that I just pushed it again just to see what it does. But it does kind of the same thing because of that zoom trigger control at the bottom. When I use the manual absolute the manual zoom control, it automatically adjusts for that, just like it does for the one push autofocus. Now, this is obviously the easiest way to do it, and most folks are going to use that one push autofocus, but there are times when you do need to manually focus it as well. And these two things together are really cool. I like this. And now, why would you need to manually focus? What if you had you know, an example of something that I've seen in the field in the past? Say your camera's looking across a decent scene here, but I had a chain link fence that was relatively close to the camera. The camera sometimes, because it could see so much of the background stuff through that fence, it has difficulty being able to auto adjust for the focus both on the fence and what's through it and behind it. So in instances like that, you might want to come down to the manual and do it. But what I like about these far, and here it tells you the directions, but if you step it forward, we use these step functions because this is also, you know, say you're connected remotely, right? And you're trying to fine tune, say somebody just put it up and that's what you're doing, or somebody knocked into it and something happened, basically you have to refocus it. And again, you couldn't use the autofocus because of that fence. You can do this by increments, right? Anybody that's been in the field has experienced where you're trying to fine tune some focal adjustments and you go too far, and then you have to backpedal, go back the other way, and then you've gone back too far the other way, and it takes, you know, minutes to be able to do it. It's maddening. This stepping function right here allows you to do it one by one. So remotely, it's very, very simple. You just step it forward 1, 8, and then it's going to do it. And you look and see, okay, do it one more time, etc. Instead of grabbing slider bars and moving them and trying to sort of gauge exactly which one, it just becomes easier and faster to get the job done. And that's what, total cost of ownership is all about. The faster and more easy and more intuitive our interface is, the faster anybody really can get the job done and on to the next job earning money. So again, let's just move forward then. We've got about 10 more minutes in the hour. Some basic configuration settings. We've got date and time, just like most cameras. We can sync them up to the NTP server, have various time zone settings, nothing too fancy with that. Audio settings, I'm just clicking on things so you can see them. I would suggest don't use this as your introduction to it. Get a camera itself, and as soon as you do, look at the interface. It's very simple, very easy, and intuitive. This is where you update its firmware. Basic operations. We can come down here. You can import your settings once you like them. If for whatever reason you're just on your test bench and you're trying to make sure all the cameras are working up to code, you don't have to go back to each camera and set them. You set it on one, you export these settings, and then you can import them on the other cameras. So, and obviously when you get out to the real world and put it on the latitude system is going to be pushing that stuff to the camera itself, taking no heed of any of these. So we also have on-screen settings, on-screen display, user accounts, your basic stuff, network settings, also a ton of different things. You have your RTSP feeds, well, just pretty much anything that a regular camera would have. You've got a number of different settings in here. We don't want to go too deep into these. These would be very specific case uses that you would go into and set these up. One of the great things I like about this camera itself is, they talk about plug and play and install it and set it and it's done. That's what this camera is all about. So it can go very deep into some of these other settings, but these have already all been fine-tuned, except for the event type things that you would have to set up on your own. And that's the next one right here. We do have our tampering and our motion for analytics, audio based on sound intensity, right? Increase in sound, gunshot, maybe you can have it an alert. And then what do you do with the alerts? You use the event handler, of course, to either email, FTP, send it to the SD card on site, take a snapshot, etc. And then finally, and then next, I guess the second portion we can look at here is the streaming section, which is broken down into 3. Let's go to our video settings first. Your traditional video settings with a few caveats here, and I may be bringing Ed in again to talk about this here as we go forward, because I can stumble through it, but when I was talking with him about it at the end of last week, he's very fluid and really makes it understandable. I just haven't been exposed to this portion of it as much as he has, clearly, so we'll bring him in as the expert. But if you look at the top right here, you have different profiles that you can set up, and here's the corridor mode that I mentioned. You can turn it on and off, etc. It's got a 3 gimbal axis on it that allows you to be able to do that. And if you look down below there, we do have the multi-stream, right? All 3 streams are listed here. Now notice this one is the 1080p. Both of these it sits at the D1 right now, so I just wanted to leave it like that and then save it to show you that we can do the 720. And this is basically how it updates everything. Just pauses for a second, says hold up, and then applies those new settings, and you're good to go. Now you can also set your max bit rate. Frame rate's all set to 30 and can be 30 as well. For all of your streams, it's important to note. They all do have a variety of the H.264 profiles, again, whatever it is the customer demands or needs or wants. You got the abilities to choose. I wouldn't worry too much about the GOP, but for the encoding priority, this is really an important factor, and that's why I want to bring Ed in, I think, on this one to discuss this, because it's really important, I think, to understand the functionality of what this little slider bar is able to allow you to do. So Ed, I think I'm going to bring you in and
Sure.
see if we can't pick your brain. What is the encoding priority?
Sure. Well, I mean, a lot of people have heard of competitors coming out with what they call smart encoders, or I think one camera company calls it Zipstream technology, and it's gotten a lot of press for reducing bit rates. So one of the things that we wanted to do was demonstrate the ability of this camera. So this encoding priority, what it does is it sets the camera to utilize the bandwidth given to the camera in different ways. For instance, the default is level 7, and at level 7 it basically takes whatever bit rate you assign to the camera, whether it's 1 megabit, 3 megabits, and it uses all of that bit rate to make the best possible images. So the goal here is that if the customer has determined that they want to record at 1 megabit or 2 megabits, that's their way of determining the quality of the images that they're recording by bandwidth. So they assign more bandwidth if they want higher quality images, and they'll reduce the bandwidth if they don't expect quite as high quality images. But this, at level 7, 8, 9, or 10, what the camera will do is utilize all the bit rate that you give it. No matter what you give it, it will try to maximize the image quality to fit within that assigned bandwidth. So at the end of the month, when you look at your storage, if you assign it 1 megabit or 2 megabits, that's exactly what you'll get, no less, no more. On the other hand, some of the other manufacturers are saying, look, even though I assign my camera 3 megabits, it's only using 1.5 megabits. Isn't that a great feature? Well, it would be a great feature if, in fact, the image quality was exactly the same as it was at 3 megabits, which is what you assign to the camera. Unfortunately, it is not. And so that's the foundation, that's some of the fallacy of some of the technologies like Zipstream and so forth. Zipstream, I won't pick on Zipstream, but that's one that I've looked at, has a high, medium, and low setting. And if Zipstream had no effect on the image quality, of course, the factory default would be high, and they wouldn't even give you a medium or a low setting. The problem is it does have an effect on the image quality, and so in order to actually demonstrate that we can do exactly the same as the Zipstream technologies and others, what we can do is set this encoding priority a little bit lower. So for instance, at a level 4, the camera will not use all of the assigned bit rates. It will only use it when the scene gets very, very busy. Obviously, it reduces the image quality ever so slightly, but one of the things that we found out is even at a level 1, encoding priority level 1, we're actually producing sharper and more colorful images, better quality images than our competition at a lower bit rate than they do using their most advanced, whatever it's ZipStream or smart encoding technologies and things like that. So this camera has the ability to not only produce the highest quality images at the bitrate you assign, but you can also reduce that encoding priority to say, look, maybe I'll sacrifice a little bit of quality to give you lower standby bit rates. Now again, we don't think that's a particularly important feature for our competitors, because after all, if the customer says they're looking for 3 megabits image quality, they want 3 megabits image quality, and they don't expect it to be over or under at the end of the month. On the other hand, if somebody's advertising or you're up against a competitor and they're showing their latest ZipStream technology, we can easily slide this down to a level 7, level 4, or even lower, and reproduce their image quality, actually better image quality, and at lower standby bit rates than even they can achieve with their ZipStream and other implementations. So that's what the encoding priority is about. For the most part, I wouldn't play with it. I would just leave it at level 7, because whatever you assign the camera, that's exactly what it's going to use. And that's the most accurate way for a customer to be able to specify the quality that they're looking for and have the camera produce that quality over long periods of time without either going over the bit rate or under the bit rate. It will use exactly what you assign it. And we think that's the right thing to do. But these encoding priorities were put in there so that we could go up against whatever the competition is citing as what they think is a benefit of their technology. We can actually show that with this slider control. So that's what it's about. Again, not too much to actually keep in mind here. Just leave it alone, and the camera will perform very, very well with exactly the bit rate that you assign to the camera.
Excellent. All right. See, I'm glad I had you explain that. I never would have got half of that out. It sounded near as intelligent. You know what? Let's go ahead and save that then. I like that too, because I made a setting change. I did not save it, so it does remind you. These are your typical privacy zone settings, as you would normally see. Now, normally you would not privacy zone the sun, but you can move it around, etc. Privacy zone, etc. is basically for areas where, now this is on-camera privacy zone settings, right? We have the same thing in the Latitude system, but that's more of a soft privacy mask. In the Latitude, if you don't set it here in the camera and you set it in the Latitude system, it's password controlled based on whether you can actually see behind it or not. If you set the privacy mask here in the camera, keep in mind the sort of physics of that, right? If you set the privacy mask here in the camera, and then the stream is then sent down to the Latitude system, there is no way to see behind that, because the camera is itself sending the encoding with the block on there. So that's one thing to keep in mind about privacy mask. We all understand what they're for. Some governments actually require them a little bit more so than others. But basically, you don't want to be seeing into your neighbor's windows, etc. And there's a number of different reasons for them. Easy enough to set on. You turn it on, turn it off. I turned it on, it would stay on there right now. No need to go any further. And you can see you can privacy zone up to 8 different sections in one scene. And then finally, in the streaming section, we have our region of interest, right, which I like to call the region of no interest, really, right? And basically, I set up one right here. This is my road. Say my environment is here or here next to the road, but not in the road itself. So I really don't care about the cars going by in the road, unless, of course, they were to stop in my area. And then I would want to be alerted, but that's analytics and dwell time and things of that nature. But basically what I'm trying to help here is because of all of this activity, it's going to make my camera want to work harder to try to encode all that change, right? Just like we all know, bandwidth can rise significantly in other manufacturers' cameras based on motion, but at least some when the activity is higher. So we want to use these region of interests, or like what I like to call the region of no interest, to tell the system I really don't care about what is in here. See, I'm off a little bit. I need to make this bigger or wider or whatever to catch them all. But really, I don't care about these cars going by. Yeah, go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, I was going to comment on this. So one of the use cases for this is, you have a customer who's got, like for instance, a car lot, and they've got a busy highway going by, and they really don't care to pay for the encoding or have the encoding bandwidth used on keeping that highway looking perfect, when they really don't care what's going on out there, so they can draw a box over the highway. And the camera will tend to move more of the bandwidth that you've allotted to it over to the area that's important. Another case would be where you have a situation where you've got a lot of trees and they're blowing in the wind and there's a lot of detail moving around, and again, the customer doesn't care at all about those trees. He wants to use very low bandwidth, so maybe he wants to use disk saver level or low level setting in the bandwidth, and doesn't want to waste the camera's effort in trying to keep the leaves on the trees looking perfect as they continuously move around in the wind. So this is a way to draw a box around those moving trees and things like that that just happen to be in the picture, and it will tell the camera to basically use a lot less of its encoding bandwidth on those. So if you're assigned 1 megabit, instead of using 30% of it on those moving trees, which just never stop moving, maybe it will now use only 5% of its bandwidth for those moving trees, and it will use the rest of the 95% on the areas of the image that the customer really cares about. So this is what the region of interest in encoding does, and it just allows the customer to kind of demote areas that are not interesting to them.
That's a really big bandwidth saver as well, and encoding saver. The machine just doesn't have to work near as hard if you tell it not to, right? Say, hey, don't worry about this so much. Don't lift it.
The thing to keep in mind here is because the camera will honor the bandwidth, even with those trees moving. It's going to honor the bandwidth. So if you send it 1 megabit and the trees are moving, there's lots of details moving, it's going to honor that 1 megabit. It's not like when you draw the box around the trees, all of a sudden the bandwidth is going to drop. What it's going to do is it's going to make the areas that you care about clearer.
Right.
So it will effectively utilize most of the bandwidth that you gave to the camera to keep the areas that you do care about much clearer than the trees that you don't care about. It's not that the actual bit rate would drop just as a result of changing this setting. It would actually still use the bandwidth that you assigned, but you may be able to actually go to a lower bandwidth. So maybe before, to get acceptable image quality, you had to be at 1 megabit, and maybe now using this technology you could drop it to, say, half of that, because now you're not spending so much of the bandwidth re-encoding moving trees and things like that.
That's right. And I mean, when you talk about dropping the bandwidth in those areas, what you're meaning is encoding heavier, basically, so that you turn the compression up in areas where visual identification of specific details is just not needed, right? I mean, it's you're fine-tuning your camera to perform how you want it to perform, not just sort of it's a great out-of-the-box solution, but for specific instances like the ones that you just mentioned, it's great to have the opportunity to be able to do this. And really significantly lower the amount that we have to pay for all of those things if we didn't have those fine-tuning. So finally, we're about 3 minutes over the top of the hour. We're just going to show the last section here, and then we'll break for see if we have any questions, and if not, we'll move forward and let you go back to your day. So in the camera section, the last and final of the 3 sections here, we've got our exposure here. Again, didn't save my settings. Our exposure settings are here. Some of the things it's on auto shutter right now. The max is set to 130 just to handle some of the motion that's there. It's got to be high enough. If I dropped it down lower, you'd see some little stops and start kind of things.
Well, you wouldn't, because it wouldn't take the lower shutter speed unless it got dark.
Or I took that off.
Remember, this is you're setting the maximum slow shutter. So if you drop that box down, you'll see that you can go from not that box, but the one below it.
Sure.
Yeah. So you can see that you can keep the minimum shutter speed. I think the factory default is 1/7.5. So as it starts to get dark, the camera can move to 1/15 and 1/7.5 to remain in color mode into extremely dark conditions.
Gotcha.
But as you saw earlier with the 2.5 lux, even at 1/30, the camera has extraordinary sensitivity. So.
Right.
For the most part, the camera is going to stay at the higher shutter speeds because of the extraordinary sensitivity. This is just a way that you can limit the shutter speed under extreme low light conditions. So that's what that's for.
Very specific use case.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now this, I did mention early on that I was going to turn this on and turn it off. Now it's a smaller picture, so you can't see the huge details, but you'll see a significant change when I turn off the digital WDR. You'll see the bushes. I mean, it's just basically a black screen or a dark green or sort of black area there. You can't make out a whole lot of details. And
you notice the sun also got brighter. If you look up towards the globe there, you'll see that the sun actually started to get brighter.
Yep.
And this is a case where in the past only multi-shutter WDR was able to reduce the brightness. The digital WDR were simply able to make, like for instance, the bushes would get brighter, but the sun would never get darker with the previous generation of digital WDR. But you can clearly see that this is able to knock down those bright areas as well as bring up the dark areas, and that is really treading into the area of multi-shutter WDR capabilities, which previously that was the only way that these kinds of wide dynamic range conditions could be addressed. And if you were to compare the WDR capability as we did in these earlier slides, you can clearly see how much different or how much better the new breed of digital WDR is. And now we predict that you'll start to see less and less, as this technology gets out there, you'll see less and less demand for what they used to refer to as true WDR. The reason they call it true WDR was because it could deal with both the bright conditions and the dark conditions. This now can do both. So this has moved much, much closer and now shares that capability with what they used to refer to as true WDR.
Excellent. That's true. And again, we could play back and forth if, on the big screen, but we have to go back out to live. And there's just a few more things to talk about. So now down at the bottom of this setting, you can see the day-night setting, excuse me. It's in auto mode. You can sort of lock it down into whatever you like for a specific case use. It also has fast or normal or slow about how it's going to actually do that. And you can see these two slider bars right here for sensitivity. It does have divergent ones, right? Which means it doesn't use the same sort of sensor, kind of based on what you're telling it here, to go from day to night and from night to day. Now, day to night, as you can imagine, it's a slow process and light dims away faster and faster. So the sensitivity before it switches to that, you want to keep down kind of low. But then the sensitivity from night to day is different, right? The sun sort of rises and all of a sudden, boom, the sun's over the horizon. And there's now, Ed, I think you mentioned these two different setting bars right here and the significance for these.
Yeah, so basically this allows you to set both the day to night and night to day. What you're going to find is the default settings at level 1 keep the camera in color mode until it gets to very, very low light, and that's due to the sensitivity of the camera. So we don't need to give up color as early as you would have with many other cameras out there. For instance, we go up against light catchers and light finders, and there's a whole bunch of other nomenclatures out there for these low light cameras.
Hey, Ed, those cameras are backlight illumination, right? I mean, that's the same thing as ours. So the technology that allows those things to operate, we also employ, is basically what you're saying. Just without the fancy names.
I would say today, to make a true light finder, light catcher, or one of these extraordinarily sensitive cameras, you really should be using the backside illuminated sensor technology, which is the newest out. Although I will say that some of these other manufacturers who offer light catcher or light finder or whatever are not yet using the backside illuminated sensor technology, because it's very, very new. And that's why this camera deals very, very effectively with light finder, light catcher, and all of these others very well, because we have a more advanced sensor technology and better DSP to process that. So coming back to these sliders, what it means is that this camera will stay in color mode and keep the color evidence longer than most of our competitors. And at a level, on the day to night, at a level 6, which is the default, means that it will also transition back to day at a very high sensitivity. Will actually transition much sooner to get it back into color mode. So the idea is stay in color mode as long as you can. If you have to transition into night mode, do so, but then as soon as the light levels recover a little bit, get back into day mode again, because color evidence is absolutely the most critical thing we have.
Perfect. All right, and then finally on this slide, or on this screen, you can see we do have some IR controls, including the ability to turn up or down the LED brightness. So finally, the last two things to point out, these are really quick. These are picture adjustments. A lot of times these are settings that you don't really go into and set. The camera has already been tuned to be able to handle a lot of the background things, but you can come in here and enter and change some sharpness. I don't remember the last time somebody changed the gamma correction. But again, for very, very specific case uses, you might want to come in here and adjust some of these individual settings based on some crazy lighting or whatever you've got. But for the most part, these are just here to let you play around. Just don't get yourself into trouble by changing these and then forgetting that's what happened, because you look at your image and it's going to look crazy. If you drop this all the way down to brightness, you're trying to figure out why everything else doesn't work. That's why. But anyway, also the mirror flip settings, depending on how you're mounting options are, or excuse me, what you want to do as far as mounting options, we've got you covered on a number of different choices right here, just like good cameras do. And then finally, the last one is just a white balance mode. You do have a couple of auto choices for the white balance mode. They kind of do the same thing, but just a little bit differently in how they do it. And then you do have a manual white balance. Why would you use the manual? Well, you know, in a situation like, say, a conveyor belt in the factory, right? You got very limited or very controlled lighting, but you have things flashing by, right, that could do things. So there may be some need to actually have a manual white balance, but I can't think of too many others. Generally, I would leave that setting alone. So keep in mind, it's set up to be coming out of the box in its best performing status. If there are some things that need to be fine-tuned based on the application that your area environment that you're in, we do, as you can see, have all of those settings to be able to allow you to do that as well. So with that said, I don't see any further questions. Did somebody disable the questioning capabilities? Because usually we have a few, but maybe this one, the people just wanted to see the camera, see what it looked like, see the interface, and nod their heads and say, yeah, that looks pretty easy. I'm going to go get me one. So with that said, Ed, do you have anything else you want to add, or Haim? We can bring you back in and see if there's anything that you'd like to add before we close it out. Ed?
I would just say, as a summary, we've done a lot of testing against the very, very latest technology from the competitors. Some I've mentioned, like I say, Light Finder, Light Catcher, Zipstream, other smart encoding capabilities, and these cameras, these Ariel Gen II cameras, go head-to-head and really, really do a great job, much more sensitive than most of the competitors, and much lower bandwidth than most of the competitors. We've actually gotten some customer pushback on some of our storage calculations. They don't believe that the cameras can do it at this kind of storage. So that's the kind of great feedback that you get when a customer doesn't believe that the camera can produce the kind of image quality that you're talking about at the bit rates that we're talking about. So that speaks very strongly for what we've been able to achieve with the Ariel Gen II. Definitely,
definitely true. When I heard that story, I laughed, right? Because you know, the customer's setting a minimum threshold because they've determined through consultants or whoever that that's, you know, your minimum. Anybody below that's probably lying to you, right? They probably can't do it. So it's a great hurdle for us, right? I mean, it's kind of funny that we face that hurdle, but it's one that we sort of like, because that just shows that you know, we can actually more than just achieve, we can exceed what most other folks can do as well when it comes to bandwidth reductions. So, Haim, the last and final thought. Can you add anything to the webinar? Are you still awake? Haim, are you there?
Most definitely. So thanks, Marty.
Good.
Much appreciate it. And we definitely want to hear your feedback. So if there's anything that comes up after this webinar, please feel free to reach out to the training and or product group, and would like to discuss your feedback. Thank you.
Excellent. All right, guys. Thanks for attending the webinar. Again, keep a lookout. We've got another one coming up in about a month where we're introducing another awesome, cool, brand new product as well in the camera line. So stay tuned for that. And with that, I'll let you go now. We will be recording, well, we have been recording this session. A recording will be made available to all attendees of the webinar. So if you need anything else from me about the webinar or this camera or anything else DVTEL related, send me an email, mmajor@dvtel.com. And with that, I'll let you go. Thanks.